At least for me, I don't really consider myself engaged poet, and so I also find it very paradoxical to speak about political poetry in lots of ways. And I didn't know what should I talk about, or whether I should be presenting some vision of what poetry should be doing. And in the end, I went back to the original proposition, and I actually tried to stay with what you ask from us. And I tried to ask myself whether there is anything at all that could be regarded political or engaged in my poetry as a way of exercise for myself. So I committed the double mistake of trying to speak about politics and also speaking a little bit about my own work, even though I also consider it weird to be here talking about myself. Yeah, but what can I do now? I've written the text, so I have to read it to you. So bear with me. Thank you. And I'm trying to explain why what I do seems to me relevant to today. In April 2013, Facebook introduced a tool that allows you to tell your friends what you are doing and, more importantly, how you are feeling while posting something. The strength of the tool that on top of the predetermined options in the form of a drop-down menu, you could also enter your own formulation, Sonder for example, was also its greatest weakness. In general, programmers strive to structure information so that the desired goal is always just one step away. Clicking on a menu, then choosing or typing in your own description totals already at least 2 steps, plus the choice requires thought. A better iteration of the same came on February the 24th this year with the so-called reactions button. Like, love, wow, sad and angry icon stems that are immediate, quick, and with their interjection-like verbal equivalents require minimal amount of introspection. While Facebook trains us to translate our emotions so that computers could process them, the big data business continues booming, with data analysts able to predict a range of traits based on seemingly unrelated information. Comparing my likes to a vast pool of users' data, the Apply Magic Sauce app predicted that I am with 60% likelihood a female, and my area of expertise is probably psychology, closely followed by art and journalism. Experts warn that patterns gleaned will likely lead to further cementing of economic inequality, with insurance companies and banks basing the risks calculation of mortgages, insurance, etc. on how people in your demographic group generally fare, rather than on your own particular tax return. Not mentioning that social platforms not only train us to express ourselves intelligibly to computers, but also actively interfere with our emotions. Yet the app was right. My likes do speak more eloquently than my CV. What originally attracted me to poetry was indeed not personal fetishism for the word, the intricacies of its sound and the magical ritual object-like qualities some associate with it. Instead, it was personal fetishism for the nuances of emotions we attach to words. I'm fascinated by our tendency to read intentional expression into all kinds of letter soup we encounter, the compulsion to docilely project and empathize ourselves into carefully constructed semantic nets organized around a capital I. Today, the pleasure of the lyric seems to be less about the ornamental crafting of form, and I'm going back to the instruct and please, and to recalling emotions and tranquility and empathy that Worth was just talking about. So ornament. I'm all doing everything. Today, the pleasure of the lyric seems to be less about the ornamental crafting of form, which can be very rudimentary, and more about emotion, which more often than not means expression of oneself in particular. In 2011, Marjorie Perloff characterized the workshop poem, as we could perhaps also call it in no derogatory sense, the pop poem, by the fact that 1. Poetry is assumed to be self-expression, the expression of one's most private and often painful feelings. 2. Poetry is text that is lineated and, when delivered orally, punctuated by pauses at line ends. And 3. Poetry exploits phrasal repetition. If my poetry can be regarded as experimental as it would seem from me being here, then it is probably because I have been trying to go against the grain of this self-expression and variously detach my psychophysical person from the lyric I in the form of presenting a suspicious lyric I or no lyric introspective I at all. as in a collaborative project where me and my colleague performed a protozoic organism. The notion of authenticity and inner voice implies in self-expression, as it is popularly understood, harks back to the romantic idea of an inwardly derived personal original identity, which is also the basis of the modern liberal political subject. Tapping into one means meddling with both of them, it would seem. If poetry and self-expression are popularly seen as equal, then why not use poetry to examine and question the nature of self-expression? Perloff's characterization offers almost a ready mold, an anaphoric string of fragments all starting with an I, a snippet yet smooth prose-like language that in its repetitiveness is lamentative but courts the impersonal. As any mold, it is most interesting when it produces faulty casts. In one of my texts, which is probably not a perfect example of poetic engagement because it is primarily cheered at poets, I proffer a whole series of such eyes, each with her and her own worldview, values and feelings towards poetry, and let the readers deal with the resulting cognitive dissonance on their own. In another text, I detail items from an appropriate relationship questionnaire to clinically confront the reader with a range of imaginary relationship situations. The I, this time missing amidst its impersonal language, is implied in the situation of the respondent, an empty position waiting to be filled by the reader, each line an opportunity for him or her to reconsider what intimacy means. I'm using the example of social media at the start of my short talk to illustrate how they highlight the critical role of self-expression for the coherence of the polis, also with the way they have become our primary media of reception of political news and opinion pieces. The granulation, economic and political separation in our increasingly stratified and unequal society is mirrored in the polyglossia of the fragments of thoughts that come up on our Facebook walls, organized around solipsistic eyes, their opinions often justified by the strength of the underlying emotion. Political arguments are made on the basis of statements not unlike the following one. I'm very, 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 very angry. I'm angry with a cool, lucid, rational anger, and anger that wipes out any detachment, any indulgence, that commands me to answer and finally to spit. And as we wage verbal battles or deliberately hold ourselves from entering the discussion, which is equally difficult, it also forcefully puts us face to face with the varied emotions that ensue from the clash with alien information worlds surrounding other eyes, with other eyes formed by alien information worlds. I'm interested in poetry that can simulate this clash and can make us distrust the ostensibly justified urge to self-expression. I also find the rhetoric and stylistics of such personal, indirectly political confessions intriguing, and this is why it interests me to quote, paraphrase appropriate passages from various sources and juxtapose and manipulate them. Ideally, a text is an identification trap. It is meant to attract a self-centered, effective, schematic response from the part of the reader and mirror it back at him or her, make him or her aware of it, and of the complicit role poetry is able to play, because poetry is by no means saintly. It is dangerous how justified we often tend to feel in our affect, and to me showing the limitations of the lyric I, desecrating it, is one way of eroding that justification. This indeed seems a very feeble form of engagement, with a massive humanitarian catastrophe happening 11 hours on train away from us. It seems that being a poet, literary organizer, editor, or a literary activist, to borrow a phrase from the crowd prospectus, leaves almost no room for other forms of activism or charity, as we have been speaking before. Poets are in competition with other professions and also with one another as poets. Participating less in this competition, commodification, overproduction it entails is perhaps another possible form of poetic engagement. I wonder if the fact that I write, publish, produce very little is also a form of engagement, but it is also a result of awareness of the profusion of written text. At any rate, I am too suspicious of self-expression, and I like to approach the nuances of emotions we attach to words critically. Such an approach is not geared to activate new emancipatory and society-transforming potentials primarily, but hopefully can contribute to the activation of the malevolent potentials already there in us. Thank you.